Okay, so today we're looking at Presents from My Aunt in Pakistan, which is written by the poet Maniza Alvi. So let's think about the context first of all. So she is of a mixed cultural heritage. Well, she was born in Pakistan. She describes in this poem how she moved to the UK at a young age, so when she was a baby. She had a Pakistani father and an English mother, and her poetry in this poem here is very much about that kind of mixed cultural identity. So she says the experience she describes is of growing up and feeling half Pakistani on the edge of things. Let me just find you another quote from her here. Okay, so she also said, growing up, I felt that my origins were invisible because there weren't many people to identify with in Hatfield at that time of a mixed race background, or indeed from any other race. So I felt there was a bit of a blank drawn over that. I think I had a fairly typical English 1950s, 60s upbringing. When I eventually went to Pakistan, I certainly didn't feel that was home. I'd never felt so English, but I never felt entirely at home in England. And of course, I'm not part of the Asian community at all. And it feels a bit odd sometimes that because of the poems that I've written about my Asian background, I sometimes tend to be identified as a black writer. I tend to think of England as being very culturally mixed now, but it's important to know where you come from, which is perhaps what I was lacking as a child. I think it's important to know what has gone into your making, even quite far back. I think it gives you a sense, perhaps, of richness. It's also important to note that in the poem, she's speaking very much about her teenage experience, okay? And that's often a time when you're kind of working out who you are and establishing that sense of identity, and that is very much relevant to her as a mixed race person in the poem. Okay, so the title of the poem is Presents from My Aunt in Pakistan. So straight away, obviously, we can see they're her aunts. We've got the first person possessive, so this is obviously about her cultural background. We've got the noun aunts, which is obviously to do with family, and it's made very clear to us that these are coming from Pakistan, and we can see from that title that she's obviously not there, they're being sent to her. Let's look then at this first paragraph. They sent me a salwar kameez, peacock blue, and another glistening like an orange split open, embossed slippers, gold and black, points curling. Candy-striped glass bangles, snapped, drew blood. Like at school, fashions changed in Pakistan. The salwar bottoms were broad and stiff, then narrow. My aunt chose an apple green sari, silver bordered, for my teens. And then the thing that strikes me about this first paragraph is all of the imagery and all of the colour within it that's conveying the vibrancy of the clothes that she's been sent. Okay, so the salwar kameez is peacock blue. So straight away we think about a peacock and we're thinking of this kind of showy animal that's very over the top, that kind of flaunts its flamboyance in order to get attention. So that metaphor suggests that these kind of clothes, they're exquisite, but they're also too extravagant for her, and that she, in comparison to them, ends up feeling that she's inadequate. So these clothes don't really make her connect with her Pakistani heritage. She feels very much at odds with it. Like, the clothes are beautiful, but she doesn't quite kind of live up to them. They actually make her feel uncomfortable. That's continued in the next simile, and another, glistening like an orange split open. So obviously it's glistening, it's beautiful, it's an orange, it's bright and it's colourful, but the verb split is really connoting a sense of violence, okay? And I think that split is also symbolic of her sense of having a split cultural heritage and a split sense of identity. She doesn't feel like she quite belongs in the Pakistani culture or in the English culture. And then we have embossed slippers, gold and black. So again, colourful, but their points are curling. Now, I think that suggests kind of struggle and violence, that they're curling back towards her. We get more imagery, another metaphor, candy-striped glass bangles. Okay, so obviously candy is sweet. We've got that kind of sensory image there, but they snapped and drew blood. So what seems kind of very sweet and has got this childlike element to it actually brings about some violence. And I think what that's showing us symbolically is that the clothes are beautiful and she's drawn to them, but they really kind of fracture her inner sense of who she is. This is important to say that fashions change, okay, so that is making a connection between her kind of Pakistani and UK identity. The next important thing, I think, is that the bottoms are broad and stiff. Shows us that these clothes are kind of constraining her, they're limiting, they're suffocating. And then we get another sensory metaphor. My aunt's chosen apple green sari, okay, so here this has got kind of, you know, apple, connotations of health and nature, nice bright colour, but they juxtapose the poet's feelings, okay, so she doesn't feel beautiful enough to be wearing these clothes. Silver bordered, again, we've got this reinforcing an element of kind of luxury and refinement for her teens. It is important when you're thinking about the speaker of the poem to be talking about the fact that she's a teenager, she's kind of got this emerging sense of identity, but at the moment it's very conflicted. She doesn't really know who she is. Okay, let's move this down a bit. Oh, I think it's frozen. Okay, so then she goes to try the clothes on. So I tried each satin silken top was alien in the sitting room. Now this is a really important metaphor. All of a sudden when she puts these clothes on, she becomes an alien. She doesn't know who she is. She doesn't recognize this person, like she doesn't recognize this part of her cultural identity. So that metaphor really helps us to see the conflict, and it epitomizes the effect of the clothes that have been sent from her aunt. She moved from Pakistan at a young age, okay, she talks later on about coming as a baby, and she feels really disconnected from this culture. She's unable to assimilate herself to it, and that's developed further on. So I could never be as lovely as those clothes really shows us this kind of low self-esteem, that she doesn't feel that she can she fits in with these clothes, that she's as beautiful as them, that she longs for denim and corduroy. So that verb, I think, is really showing that desperation, that desire to be normal. My costume clung to me. So again, the verb there is showing us how claustrophobic she's feeling. And I was a flame. Another really important metaphor here, okay? So obviously we've got this idea of being set on fire, showing us that she's completely overwhelmed by the sort of thoughts that these clothes are generating. She has got this real inner conflict about who she is, and actually that's feeling really destructive at this point in time. I couldn't rise up out of its fire, half English, unlike Aunt Jamila. So this is contextually talking about a phoenix, okay, that's reborn in fire. But the point here, of course, is that she can't rise up out of its fire. So she can't be reborn into this Pakistani culture because she feels too awkward, too embarrassed. The enjambment here, and we'll talk more about the form later on, but this is a really nice example of how the enjambment and the structure of the poem emphasizes that sense of feeling dislocated. Okay, then she talks about the camel skin lamp, which is also symbolic for how she's feeling. I wanted my parents' camel skin lamps, switching it on in my bedroom to consider the cruelty and the transformation from camel to shade, marvel at the colours like stained glass. So there's a real juxtaposition here. Obviously this lamp is kind of symbolic, isn't it, in the way that it changes when the light goes on, just like the way she changes when she puts her clothes on. So there's a sense that the lamp is symbolic of her, but there's a cruelty, okay, look at the alliteration there, really emphasizing that cruelty with the plosive sounds as well, showing the harshness of it, that actually that transformation is uncomfortable and it hurts, but she's also marveling at the colors, so she's simultaneously attracted and repelled by it because it's beautiful. We've got this simile here as well, like stained glass, showing us the beauty of it. Okay, so let's move on to the next verse. So my mother cherished her jewellery. So this is at the bottom of the page. Sorry, you can't see it, but that verb's really showing us how important this jewellery is to her. Indian gold, dangling, filigree. So it's an important part of her identity, but it was stolen from our car. See, that act of theft suggests that that part of her identity, that sense of who she is destroyed. And I guess the poem is also partly about how we construct our sense of self, you know, that it does often connect to our appearance, and we often choose clothes to fit in with a particular set of group norms. The presents were radiant in my wardrobe. Okay, so should be a positive thing, like the idea of being radiant, it's vibrant, but for her this is a really negative thing. My aunts requested cardigans from Marks and Spencer's. So this is quite a nice contrast, a nice juxtaposition here, okay? Actually, her aunts are sending these really vibrant, colourful clothes, but what they want is something that's very dull and very normal. And then she goes on to talk about the school friend who comes around. So my salwar kameez didn't impress the school friend who sat on my bed, asked to see my weekend clothes. This suggests that the kind of friends that she's hanging out with are rejecting her kind of cultural heritage. And then obviously that brings hurt to her as well. But, so that fronted conjunction, you know, we've had all of this imagery about how uncomfortable she feels, but this fronted conjunction here is really showing us that there's a part of her that's drawn to this culture as well. But often I admired the mirror work, tried to glimpse myself in the miniature. Okay, so she's trying to imagine herself in the mirror here, okay, in these tiny little circles, trying to imagine herself as this kind of Pakistani person, woman, and that really shows us her desire to fit in with that culture and to be able to assimilate it. However, the verb tried lets us know that this is unsuccessful. And then she recalls the story of coming to England. So recall the story how the three of us sailed to England. Prickly heat had me screaming on the way. So we get a sense straight away that this was a traumatic journey for her as a baby. I ended up in a cot in my English grandmother's dining room, found myself alone, playing with a tin boat. I think there's a sense here, you know, she doesn't even end up in a bedroom, she ends up in a cot in a dining room. So there's a sense definitely of kind of being displaced, of not fitting in from the start. And then, again, she's alone. So it's a really inauspicious start. It kind of doesn't bode well. So let's look at how the poem ends. I pictured my birthplace from 50s photographs. So she's looking back at the old photographs, and the fact is that shows she wants to connect with this heritage. When I was older, there was a conflict, a fractured land throbbing through newsprint. So obviously the political unrest in Pakistan reawakens her kind of sense of identity and reawakens her confusion. She's obviously concerned for her relatives. It's interesting that it's a fractured land, just like her identity is fractured too. It's throbbing, so I think that verb really shows us the kind of, on one hand, the kind of aggression, but on the other hand, the kind of power with which it's leaping out at the newsprint to her, because she's really kind of, when she reads the news, she's connecting with that part of her identity. Sometimes I saw Lahore, my aunts in shaded rooms screened from male visitors. So this is really identifying that kind of cultural difference, isn't it, of the way that the aunts would have been kept away from the male visitors. There's that sense in the fact that it's shaded and it's screened and being hidden away. And obviously they're in a sense hidden away to her as well, because it's not a cultural identity that she has or that she's experienced for much of her life. Or there were beggars, sweeper girls. So these are people right at the bottom of the kind of social hierarchy, and I was there, of no fixed nationality, staring through the fretwork at the Shalimar Gardens. So she is almost the biggest outsider here, okay, because she's got no fixed nationality. That means she doesn't feel she belongs anywhere. She's kind of doesn't belong in England, doesn't belong in Pakistan, which is exactly what she described with the quotation I read out to you at the beginning of the tutorial. And so she's kind of almost below these people who are at the bottom of the kind of social hierarchy, because she doesn't fit in anywhere. At least these girls have a place in Pakistani society. She is of no fixed nationality. It's important as well that she's staring through the fretwork, so she's looking and kind of glimpsing fragmented pieces of the gardens, but she can't see it completely, which again represents the fact that she's an outsider and that she has this kind of fractured identity. So I would say then that the mood of the poem is definitely a confused one as the speaker struggles with her sense of identity, and that therefore gives it a kind of fractured atmosphere. And whilst there's no anger in the poem, there are some kind of images of violence, particularly around the war and the violence that the kind of clothes bring about for her, that we looked at and unpicked in the opening. Now, in terms of structure, the verses all have a different structure. The lines start in all different places. And I think this unfixed random structure that has no clear pattern reflects Alvy's own unfixed identity and her confused emotions. That's also further reinforced by the enjambment, where the sentences run over 2 lines or more, which really gives it that kind of disjointed feel.